Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into the world of activist investing?
Oh, yeah, it's a wild ride.
We're talking about those shareholders who, well, they're not afraid to shake things up a bit.
They use their stake in a company to really push for some serious change.
And their goals.
They could be anything from increasing that shareholder value, maybe getting a whole new leadership team in place, or even, pushing for the sale of the entire company.
Big moves, big stakes.
Definitely high stakes. We'll be looking at some big names, too, folks like Carl Icahn.
Bill Ackman.
And, of course, we can't forget the whole GameStop saga.
So how do these activist investors actually operate? It can't just be about, like, politely suggesting changes, right?
No, it's way more intense than that. We're talking about acquiring massive chunks of shares.
Enough to get their attention, I bet.
Exactly. Then they use the media, really get public opinion on their side.
Public pressure can be a powerful tool.
For sure. And sometimes they'll even go head-to-head in proxy battles, trying to get enough votes to get this, place their own people on the company's board.
So it's like a power struggle for control of the company's direction.
You got it. And it's not always smooth sailing.
I can imagine.
I remember this one time I was working with this institution, and they were really on the fence about supporting an activist investor publicly.
Why is that?
Well, they were worried it would hurt their relationship with the company's management in the long run.
So a bit of a balancing act.
Exactly.
Speaking of big personalities, let's get into some of the biggest names in the game. Who are the real titans of activist investing?
Oh, you absolutely have to start with Carl Icahn. The guy's practically a legend.
Yeah, I've heard the stories.
Known for, well, let's just say he's not afraid to play hardball. He once said, and this is a classic Icahn quote, "In takeovers, the metaphor is war. The secret is reserves. You must have reserves stretched way out ahead."
Wow, that paints a pretty vivid picture. He definitely didn't shy away from a fight. And he had some major successes too, right? Like with Apple back in 2013.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. He didn't just, casually mention they should buy back some shares.
No, he bought a huge chunk of Apple stock and then went public with his demands.
And in the end, Apple actually caved, announced a massive share buyback program, something like $300 billion.
$300 billion. That's insane.
And Icahn walked away with a cool $2 billion profit.
Talk about a power move. But Icahn's not the only player in this game. Who else should we be watching?
Well, Bill Ackman's another force to be reckoned with. He founded Pershing Square Capital Management and's gone after some pretty huge companies, Herbalife.
Valiant Pharmaceuticals, too.
Ackman really believes in pushing companies to reach their full potential. He's got this great quote, "I don't invest in companies because I think they'll do well. I invest because I think they should do well."
That's a great quote. It's like he's not just looking for a return on his investment. He's trying to actually make these companies better.
It's a fascinating blend of, pushing for change while also feeling a sense of responsibility.
Absolutely. So we've got the aggressive Icahn, the company improving Ackman. Who else fits in this pantheon of activist investors?
Oh, then there's Paul Singer, the head of Elliott Management. He's a little different.
How so?
A bit more diplomatic, you could say, but just as effective. Take Elliott Management's involvement with AT&T. They really push for some major strategic changes.
And asset sales, too, if I remember correctly.
They've definitely got a knack for influencing a company's direction.
So it seems like there are different styles of activism, from Icahns' more aggressive approach to Singer's more subtle influence. It makes you wonder which approach is more effective in the long run.
That's a tough one.
But before we get too deep into the different styles, we can't forget about Nelson Peltz. He founded Tryon Partners and is known for pushing for streamlined operations.
Oh, yeah. Peltz, he often tries to get on those company boards to steer things from the inside.
Like his work with Procter & Gamble.
Exactly. He pushed for changes that ended up boosting their profits.
So it seems like getting that board representation is a key strategy for a lot of these activist investors. It gives them a direct line to influence those decisions.
Absolutely. It's about more than just raising concerns. It's about having a seat at the table where those decisions are actually made.
And speaking of shaking things up, let's talk about the GameStop phenomenon. It really captured everyone's attention and showed how activist investing is evolving.
GameStop is a perfect example of what happens when you mix activist investing with, well, a ton of interest from retail investors. Those folks on Reddit, they really made their presence known.
Definitely a wild ride. For those who might not have been following every twist and turn, Can you set the stage for us?
So it all started back in 2020. Ryan Cohen, the entrepreneur behind Chewy, decided to set his sights on GameStop. He saw potential, believed it could be transformed, become this digital powerhouse.
A competitor to Amazon, even.
Exactly. But GameStop was struggling, stuck in that old school retail model.
So Cohen comes in with this bold vision. What were his first moves?
First, he buys up a big chunk of GameStop through his firm, RC Ventures. Then he does what he's known for, sends this letter to the board.
This wasn't just a casual suggestion box, though, right?
Oh, no, this was a full-on critique of their business model. He was passionate. You could feel it, a real plea for change.
I can only imagine the board's reaction. Did they just embrace his vision?
Not right away, but they couldn't ignore him. By early 2021, Cohen had managed to get himself and two of his allies onto the board.
So a major power shift at GameStop.
Oh, yeah. And then the company started making some serious executive changes, brought in people with a background in technology, e-commerce, that sort of thing.
Cohen's vision was starting to take shape.
It definitely was. And at the same time, you had this incredible surge of interest from retail investors, especially those active on social media. GameStop became like a symbol.
A symbol of
Everyday investors challenging the Wall Street establishment.
And then, of course, the stock price went through the roof.
Oh, it was a wild ride, that's for sure. GameStop's stock hit an all-time high, $483 in January 2021.
A massive jump from where it had been.
Absolutely massive. You had social media buzz, a short squeeze. It really caught some hedge funds off guard.
Can you explain what a short squeeze is? Some of us might not be fluent in Wall Street lingo.
Basically, you have investors who bet against a stock. Those are your short sellers. And when a stock price goes up instead of down, well, they have to buy shares to cover their losses.
Which pushes the price even higher.
Exactly. It creates this feedback loop that can send a stock price skyrocketing.
So with GameStop, you had this perfect storm, right? Activist investing, this massive waves of retail investor enthusiasm, all fueled by social media.
It was a total disruption of those traditional market dynamics.
We've definitely scratched the surface here, but before we go too deep down the GameStop rabbit hole, let's take a step back and look at the overall impact of activist investors.
Good idea. We need to look at both the good and the bad, the positive and negative impacts they can have.
Okay, so we've seen how activist investors can really make waves, but is it always a good thing? Is this always a force for good in the corporate world?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest.
How so?
On the one hand, they can push companies to, really up their game, improve performance, increase shareholder value, even focus on innovation. It's like a wake-up call,
Yeah.
Forces companies to really think about their strategies.
So a catalyst for positive change.
Definitely. But there's a flip side, too.
I was thinking there had to be. What are some of the downsides?
Well, one of the biggest criticisms is that they tend to focus on those short-term gains, instead of thinking about long-term sustainability.
Ooh, like a quick fix instead of the lasting solution.
Exactly. They push for things like cost-cutting, selling off assets, or stock buybacks, which can make a company's stock price jump in the short term, but
But it might weaken the company in the long run.
you got it.
Are there any examples of this, like where it really backfired?
Well, a lot of people point to Carl Icahn and TWA back in the 80s.
TWA, as in the airline?
Yep, Trans World Airlines. Icahn took control, but even though he tried to streamline things, cut costs, it didn't work. TWA ended up going bankrupt.
So even the best activist investors can't guarantee a win.
It's a risky game, that's for sure.
Let's shift gears back to GameStop for a minute. Before the whole 2021 frenzy, before Ryan Cohen came along, were there other activists trying to shake things up at GameStop?
Oh, there were a few. You could say they kind of paved the way for Cohen. Back in 2019, you had Hestia Capital and Permit Capital.
What were they pushing for?
Well, they thought GameStop stock was way undervalued, so they were urging the board to, do something about it.
What kind of something?
Share buybacks, for one. They argued that was the best way to, give back to the shareholders, especially with the stock being so low.
Okay, so they were already raising concerns,
Right.
but maybe not with the same kind of vision as Cohen.
Right. Hestia Capital, they actually send this whole letter to the board, outlining their worries and proposing a plan. Curtis Salzvig III, he was their chief restructuring officer at the time, he really hammered home that point about buybacks.
So it sounds like they were on the right track, but maybe not radical enough to really turn things around.
Maybe, but they definitely set the stage. And then along comes Ryan Cohen with this whole digital transformation idea.
Right. His 2020 letter to the board was like a total game changer. It wasn't just criticism. It was like a whole new vision for the company. What exactly was he proposing?
Oh, Cohen's letter, it was a classic. First off, he was adamant about this need to shift to e-commerce, like
They
immediately.
saw the writing on the wall, huh?
He did. Argued that clinging to that old retail model was like suicide. He wanted a smooth online platform, where customers could buy anything and everything, from games to consoles to digital content, the whole 9 yards.
So basically, wake up GameStop. The future's digital.
Pretty much. And he was right, wasn't he? He saw that GameStop had this brand recognition, loyal customers, and could become a real player in online gaming retail. He even talked about expanding into new areas like PC gaming hardware, streaming services. It was about creating a whole ecosystem.
It wasn't just about selling games anymore. It was about the whole gaming lifestyle.
Exactly. He wanted to create a community, a place for gamers to connect and share their passion. But Cohen also knew to do all that, you needed a leadership shakeup. He felt the current management team, well, they just didn't have what it took.
That's a bold move, calling for a change in leadership like that.
Oh, yeah, he wasn't afraid to step on some toes.
So he was demanding action, not just suggesting it.
He knew what he wanted, and he wasn't backing down. And he had the experience to back it up. Remember, he built Chewy from the ground up. He knew e-commerce. He knew logistics.
So he brought a lot more to the table than just ideas.
Exactly. He had concrete recommendations for their supply chain, their fulfillment operations. He pointed out that their logistics were outdated, inefficient. They needed to modernize those warehouses, make shipping faster, invest in technology. In the e-commerce world, speed is everything. Yeah. And he knew exactly what they needed to do.
It's fascinating how his experience with Chewy really shaped his vision for GameStop.
He was the right person at the right time with the right ideas. And he wasn't just focused on the behind-the-scenes stuff. He also had a lot of ideas for how to expand their products, appeal to a wider audience.
Going beyond just the hardcore gamers.
Exactly. He was talking about PC gaming hardware, streaming services, even esports merchandise. It was about becoming a one-stop shop for everything gaming related.
From a retailer to a lifestyle brand.
You got it. He was all about building a community, creating a place where gamers could connect, share their passion, find everything they needed.
So it sounds like his letter was really a blueprint for a total transformation of GameStop. But I'm guessing the board didn't just roll over and say, okay, you're in charge now.
Well, there was some pushback at first, which is understandable, but Cohen's influence was undeniable. He had a reputation, a significant stake in the company, and his ideas were, well, they were hard to ignore.
So what happened? Did he get his way?
Let's just say change doesn't happen overnight, especially with a big company like GameStop. But his letter definitely set things in motion. Within a few months, he and two of his buddies had snagged those board seats.
So they were in position to make some real changes.
Precisely. And they didn't waste any time. Soon after, a bunch of top executives left the company.
Felt like a shakeup.
Oh, yeah. And they were replaced by people Cohen had handpicked. Folks with experience in e-commerce, technology, digital marketing. It was the dawn of a new era for GameStop.
So they were really putting his plan into action. What were some of the first changes they made?
Well, they knew they had to up their online game. So they invested heavily in their website and that mobile app, made it more user-friendly, more engaging,
Trying to compete with the big players.
Exactly. And they worked on their shipping and fulfillment, trying to speed up those deliveries, improve customer service.
Addressing those issues that Cohen had pointed out.
Exactly. They expanded their product selection, too, like you were saying, going beyond just video games. They added PC gaming hardware, esports merchandise, all that stuff. And they started focusing more on building a community, creating those online forums, hosting events.
So they were hitting all the points that Cohen had laid out in his vision, transforming GameStop from that brick-and-mortar store into a digital-first, community-driven gaming platform.
That was the goal, and they were making it happen. And of course, this all happened right when that retail investor frenzy was kicking off. Social media, the meme stock craze, it all added fuel to the fire.
It's amazing how all these things came together, right? Activist investing, new technology, the power of social media.
It was a recipe for disruption, that's for sure.
But let's be realistic. Did Cohen's vision actually pan out? Did GameStop become the digital giant he imagined?
Well, it's still early to say for sure, but there's no doubt that Cohen was the catalyst for change at GameStop. Whether those changes will lead to lasting success, well, that's still up in the air.
They're still facing some stiff competition, right? Amazon, all the other online gaming platforms.
It's a tough market, that's for sure.
But Cohen's story is still a fascinating one. Shows how one person with a bold vision and the guts to challenge the status quo can really shake things up.
It definitely makes you think about the power of activist investors, how they can shape the future of companies, even entire industries.
So we've seen how activist investors operate, some of their biggest wins and losses, and how they're changing the game for companies like GameStop. Now, let's broaden our view a bit.
You mean look at the bigger picture, how this whole activist investing trend is impacting the way businesses operate on a larger scale.
Exactly. So we've seen those individual battles, those activist investors taking on specific companies. But what about the bigger picture? How is all this impacting the way companies are governed?
Well, I think it's fair to say activist investors have really upped the ante when it comes to accountability.
In what way?
They're shining a light on issues that, frankly, companies used to get away with ignoring. It's not just about profits anymore.
So what kind of issues are we talking about?
Executive pay, for one. Board diversity. Environmental practices. Social responsibility. All that stuff is on the table now.
So they're pushing companies to think beyond just the bottom line.
Exactly. And they're using their power as shareholders to make it happen. Scrutinizing those executive bonuses, demanding more diverse boards, pushing for sustainable and ethical policies. It's like they've become the corporate watchdogs.
It's interesting, right? This idea that investors can have that kind of influence. But are companies actually taking it seriously? Or is it all just for show?
It's probably a bit of both, to be honest. But one thing's for sure, companies can't ignore these ESG issues anymore.
ESG.
Environmental, social, and governance. Investors care about that stuff now, and companies are realizing they have to as well. All this scrutiny, it's forcing them to be more transparent, more accountable, which is a good thing, right?
Definitely. It shows that investors have more power than they might realize.
They really do. And this shift in power, well, it's impacting the financial markets too.
How so?
Think about GameStop. All that activism, amplified by social media, it created huge swings in the stock market.
Volatility city.
Exactly. And it's not just individual companies. When a big-name activist goes after a company, everyone in that industry takes notice.
So it sets off a chain reaction.
You got it. Companies start rethinking their strategies, making changes so they don't become the next target. It's like game of chess, everyone watching the masters move.
But as we said before, there are downsides too, right? Focusing on short-term profits instead of long-term sustainability.
That's a big one. And sometimes in that pursuit of profit, the needs of employees or the community might get overlooked.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. Activist investors need to consider the consequences of their actions, and companies need to be open to that feedback. It has to be a two-way street.
It's fascinating stuff, and it seems like it's just getting started. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the tactics of activist investors to their impact on specific companies like GameStop, to the broader implications for corporate governance and the market as a whole.
It's a complex landscape, that's for sure, and it's constantly evolving.
So as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. Could activist investing, with its focus on shareholder value and corporate accountability, actually be a force for good? Could it push companies to adopt those more sustainable and ethical practices?
Or is it just about making a quick buck for those wealthy shareholders, potentially at the expense of, the greater good?
That's the question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer.
It's something we all need to think about as this trend continues to unfold.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of activist investing. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep those questions coming, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.